Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Thoughtful Bro here for another amazing week of author interviews with Syed Masood. He's here to talk about his book today, The Bad Muslim Discount. It's going to be a terrific, engaging discussion. The book itself, I just finished this morning, is really wonderful. Wonderful is not a word I use all the time, but this book is wonderful. It's big-hearted, it's warm, it's funny. This book has a lot of range. Anyway, I'm stealing my own thunder here. I'm going to tell you about the book in a minute. Just want to tell you a little bit about The Blaze. In case you don't know, The Blaze, we're an all volunteer organization. We have been here since about a year ago. We just had our 1-year anniversary, helping writers to reach readers virtually. As everybody knows, it's been really hard for writers to build community and connect with readers in the world we live in today. And so Mighty Blaze came in to fill that gap. And if you want to see all of our Mighty Blaze interviews, the main place to look is Facebook or YouTube. If you want to see the Thoughtful Bro interviews, you can find them also on my personal homepage, markcecilauthor.com. We put about 6 to 7 new author interviews up every single week. And so please just subscribe to our newsletter if you'd like. You can find that on amightyblaze.com. And again, we're an all-volunteer organization. If you want to support us, we're not asking for any money or anything. You can just follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And if you do want to spend some money, I always encourage people, spend it on the authors that we bring on the show. Spend it on The Bad Muslim Discount and Syed Masood. We're going to be posting links to bookshop.org in the comments to buy his book and his previous book, which is a YA book. You're going to hear about another book that he has coming out very shortly. Anyway, spend money on Syed Masood's book if you'd like to. A few things about what's coming up next for the Thoughtful Bro. I'm off next week, but I'm back with 2 epic guests in the next 2 weeks after that. On April 6th, I'll have Carolyn Kepnes on the show. She is the author of a book called You, which became the hit Netflix series, which I think the first season of You was streamed 42 million times. Yeah, it's one of the hottest shows ever on Netflix. That show, I think, just got renewed for its 3rd season. Her 3rd book in that series, which is called You Love Me, is coming out on April 6th. The first interview that she's going to do on her pub day is going to be with us right here. That's 2 weeks from today. And then after that, one of my personal heroes, just an absolute literary icon, George Saunders, is going to be on the week after that to talk about his new book, which is about the craft of fiction writing, called A Swim in the Pond in the Rain. He takes 6 of his favorite Russian short stories and unpacks them and tries to figure out, what does this say about the craft of writing and the craft of the short story and so on. So Carolyn Kepnes and George Saunders on April 6th and April 13th. So please mark your calendars for those. But on to this week. And this week shall not disappoint. Syed Masood grew up in Karachi, Pakistan. He is a first-generation immigrant twice over. He's been a citizen of 3 different countries in 9 different cities. He currently lives in Sacramento, California, where he is a practicing attorney. He's the author of the YA novel More Than Just a Pretty Face. And his debut adult novel is called The Bad Muslim Discount. How can I describe this book? It's, like I said, it's big-hearted, it's funny, it's just full of life. It's about family. It's an American immigration story. It was just reviewed in the New Yorker. It's getting praise everywhere. I just want to read a little bit of that praise. Gary Steingart, another great literary author and whose work I just love. He said, this is one of the bravest and most eye-opening novels of the year. Masood is a whiz at characters and knows the way the world works inside and out. This book is a future classic. The San Francisco Chronicle said, The Bad Muslim Discount reads like bingeable TV. It's fast-paced and surprising at every turn. And finally, the Seattle Times, in an absolutely rave review, said, by its end, The Bad Muslim Discount delivers a quintessentially American tale about what immigrants gain or lose when they assimilate or refuse to do so. Syed, congratulations on the book and welcome to the Thoughtful Bro.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. All right, folks, this is going to be a gregreat interview. I've heard Syed do interviews with other people, and he's an amazing guy thinking on his feet. So this is going to be a very great 45 minutes. But Syed, why don't we just turn it over to you? Tell us what the book is about.
Okay. So The Bad Muslim Discount, which I will attempt to put on the screen here. There we go.
Yes.
Is a book about the journeys of 2 young people one from Iraq, one from Karachi, who come to the United States after having lived very different lives in very different circumstances, and they collide in San Francisco in an apartment complex where the landlord offers a variety of discounts to people, including a good Muslim discount. He ends up giving the good Muslim discount to one of the protagonists, Anwar, who is actually not a good Muslim, and sort of hijinks ensue from there.
Hijinks ensue. That is like the greatest undersell of all time. I mean, this book does have hijinks, but there's just so much more. And like I said at the top, there's so much range in this book. I mean, this book does have I think its hallmark is its warmth and its wit, but it goes to some very complex and dark places as well. And I think what makes the book so wonderful is that it stays afloat because of the tone, and that allows you to go to these dark places and keep the reader going. You are a terrific reader. I think the prose is very remarkable in this book. Do you want to just do a quick reading?
Sure. So I don't like to read. I'm going to have to make sure to include some prosy sections in all my books. My writing is very dialogue heavy, admittedly. And so I don't like to read dialogue because people lose track, and I'm not a very good voice actor. By the way, we have fantastic voice actors for this book. So an audible, you guys check it out. Behj Wahadat of Bones fame does the main protagonist, Anwar. So anyway, all right.
Is the audiobook available yet? Or
oh yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah. The review for the reviews, apparently from what I've been told, I haven't read the reviews, but I've seen the ratings. The reviews and the ratings for the audiobook are higher than the ratings for the actual book. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I think I feel good about it. I'm going to go with that. All right. Okay. So I'm going to read a section at the beginning of the book where Anwar, who is one of the protagonists, is talking about Karachi, the city he grew up in. Karachi, the city that spat me out into this world, is perpetually under siege by its own climate. The Indian Ocean does not sit placidly at the edge of the massive metropolitan port. It invades. It pours in through the air. It conspires with the dense smog of modern life and the collective breath of 15 million souls to oppress you. Under the gaze of an indifferent sun, you sweat, and the world sweats with you. It's probably not as hot as hell, but it's definitely as bad as the sketchier neighborhoods of purgatory, the kinds of places you are just a little reluctant to wander after dark. When I was growing up, Karachi was a place caught between ages, grasping at modernity while still clutching at the fading lyrics of an inglorious past. It was a city of skyscrapers and small, squat shanties. It had modern highways, but was still pockmarked with peddlers wheeling vegetables over narrow dirt lanes on wooden carts. Imported luxury cars, rumbling, shining, and glimmering in marvelous mechanical glory, were not uncommon, though neither was the pitifully obnoxious braying of overladen donkeys hitched to rickety wagons. After a bad day at school, all I wanted was to go home. However, we were stuck in traffic, and the air conditioning and the air conditioner in our temperamental old Beetle was malfunctioning. Trouble started, as it often does, because my mother decided to speak. When we get home, you're going to have to take a shower. I ignored her and rolled down my window, hoping to alleviate the heat in the car a little. It was a mistake. There was no breeze, and in the vain hope for one, I had let the city in. As usual, Karachi was screaming at its inhabitants, and they were screaming right back. People were leaning on their horns, though the traffic light was red and there was nowhere to go. Hawkers carrying various goods yelled out a litany of prices in hoarse, worn voices. They sold information in newspapers and romance in strings of fresh jasmine. Divine protection, that is to say, cheap pieces of plastic etched with verses of the Quran, could also be purchased for a modest price.
It's so great. And you were saying that you haven't been to Karachi in like 20 to 25 years, and I was saying this is like James Joyce writing about Dublin in Ulysses.
That is a lofty comparison, like I said before, but it was fortunate because I was writing back to a time when I was there when Anwar was there, and so I was very certain that I was getting it right. In fact, I have had other people from Karachi come up to me, even the local. I was unfortunately at a funeral yesterday, and someone came up to me and said, "Hey, by the way, I read your book, and the descriptions of Karachi are amazing. I was there in that time, and it took me right back." So that was a lot of fun to do and try to sort of reach back. I'm not a very adding the senses or the sensory descriptions, that's the last thing I do when I'm writing. And so I always have to go back and sort of put it in. So being able to pull it off is always rewarding. So
that's really interesting. And I want to say to people who are thinking about reading this book that it is very dialogue heavy, and there's a lot of storytelling. And that passage, you said you read it because it's kind of hard to read dialogue passages without doing voices, but the book just moves along so quickly because there's just so much kind of storytelling within the story. I love your writing style, and it's this writing style of kind of, it's just sort of like one anecdote crafted to another anecdote. Then there's like a little bit of like debate about, you know, some philosophical issue. Then like some little incident happens. And then there's just this constant kind of like, how do I say it? There's just such fullness of storytelling in the work. And one of the main questions I wanted to ask you was about your style, and like, how would you describe this storytelling style that you have, and are there influences that you have?
I think, again, this is difficult to do because you start talking about influences, you're talking about huge names, and then it's like, you know, are you really anywhere close to that? No, you're not. But you know, the dialogue heaviness, Hemingway does that. And I've always admired the economy of his writing. You know, he is very much, he'll hit you hard, but he'll hit you fast, and then he'll move on. And then you're still reeling from it, you know? And so I love that about his work. When I'm writing about Desi families, I always like to go back when I have time to read Austen, because there's such a parallel between the current society that my books are about and Victorian era England. It's kind of funny in terms of sexual mores and the importance of modesty, and
that's interesting.
The families getting together and the social structures. Like there's a lot of that. So and then quite frankly, law school really helped. I really hated law school, you know, but because as an experience, it was difficult for me as a writer, because I was used to writing like an English major, and it took me a couple of years to learn how to write like a lawyer, which is very economical, and it really helps me now in my writing because I learned that you're allowed to be flowery and you're allowed to have these allusions to different things, but you have to use them carefully, and that's what I try to do. And so I try not to cut loose with the allusions too much. Now there are times when I do. Without ruining it, there's a big kiss in the book, and the entire page is just references to different biblical and Quranic and Islamic history events. And I explain none of it. But, you know, I have the luxury of doing that because for the first 200 pages, I didn't do that to you. So I feel like I'm entitled to a little bit of play.
Completely. All right, let's dig into like some of the substance of the book here. One thing that you do so well is write about family. And I've heard you say before that, you know, family is just kind of rich hunting grounds for any author, because these are not relationships that you choose, but they're relationships which last a lifetime and which you must contend with. And everybody has family relationships that they have to contend with. Tell me a little bit about like why this is such kind of a happy hunting ground for you as an author.
Well, you know, people, when they talk about literary influences, I forgot to mention Ray Romano is who I always talk about, you know, from Everybody Loves Raymond. And I remember I was talking to an uncle of mine, and we were having a debate as to what was the better sitcom. Was it Seinfeld, or was it, you know, or was it Everybody Loves Raymond? And he was like, it's not even close. Seinfeld's about nothing. And I said, you know, yeah, but life isn't about nothing. Life is about family. And so for me, it was always Ray Romano and his sort of genius of being able to capture family dynamics. I really enjoy that. So I think for me, it's important when you're writing, as you know, any character, to give them challenges that they can't really walk away from, right? I mean, if you have a mercenary who is involved in some kind of conflict, well, they can just walk away, you know? And so you have to give them a personal stake. And family is something you just can't walk away from and can't escape, especially in these circumstances that my characters are in. So I think it's just a very natural way to add personal stakes to a story.
Absolutely. So I think one of the things that everybody talks about when they're talking about this work in reviews or on Goodreads or whatever is the quality of the secondary characters and these kind of unforgettable cast of secondary characters who sort of like sometimes they're like more thumbnail sketches, but they just sort of steal the show. And like one of them, speaking of family, is his grandmother, and she teaches him everything he needs to know about life through checkers. And like I just want to read this one passage. It's so funny. When I was preparing for this interview, I was like thinking of what to talk to you about, and I kept highlighting these passages. I was like, well, I'll have to read that passage on the show because it's so great. And so I have like pages of these passages that I want to read to you, and it's going to be like me reading your book to you. But anyway, I'll try to keep it short, but I love this little bit about checkers. There's lots of little parts like this, but this is his grandmother talking to Anwar, and she's saying, checkers is the game of life. Idiots will tell you that chess is the game of life, but it isn't. Chess is the game of war. Real life is more like checkers. You try to make your way to where you need to go, and to do it, you've got to jump over people while they're trying to jump over you, and everyone is just in everybody else's way. And I love that. And there's so many more passages like that. I guess my question to you is just kind of, is this grandmother based on somebody? Is checkers a big part of your life? Where did that come from?
That sentiment is original. That's not based on anyone. But my great grandmother did teach me how to play checkers. She never actually let me win. I did win a couple of times, unlike the protagonist who does not beat his grandmother. But she was my mom's paternal grandmother, and she was a wonderful lady, and she taught me how to play. And so I drew the inspiration for Anwar's grandmother from her, but they're very different as people. But as far as, was there someone who taught me checkers? Yes, there was. And was that person also ruthless and trying to win? Yes, they were. I'm the same way with my kids, because that's how you're going to get better. And when you do beat me, which I think my son is getting close, he's 7 now. He's getting close. He's gotten close a couple of times. It's going to be more rewarding because he had to work for it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And I think just one other thing, I think that passage captures a lot of the tone of the work, and this kind of like the way that, friends and relatives try to impart wisdom to one another. There's like so much imparting of kind of folksy wisdom in this work. And I just sort of, one of the main reasons I go to literature is to have folksy wisdom imparted to me. And so your book was overflowing with that, and I loved it. All right. But there is, my favorite, perhaps, passage of the work is there's this character, Hafiz, who's this landlord. He is the originator of the Good Muslim discount. And he's a critical character in the work. He's absolutely unforgettable. And many other people who read this work say that Hafiz is their favorite character. But I just wanted, this is the last one I'll read, but this is just one more passage. And this is Hafiz talking to Anwar, the main character, just kind of explaining part of his philosophy of life. And he says, I'm super healthy, but I have not been able in my life to love anyone or hate anyone or to have any Gennoon about anything. You know what is Gennoon? I nodded. Passion. Mad passion. Yes, fire. I've never had any part of it, though I always wanted it. And then he goes on to say a little bit later, you could set the world on fire, yet you choose to always try to put the fire out. You're afraid of being burned, yet to burn and burn and burn, there's nothing till there's nothing left of me. That's all I ever wanted. And then the main character says, I'm sorry, because that's the only thing I could think of to say. And then Hafiz says, don't be sorry, my friend, be brave. I mean, I want to like frame that and put it on my wall. It's just such a beautiful passage. It's so warm. It's so full of wisdom. And so the first question from this passage is I want to ask you, what is Gennoon? It's not a word that I knew.
Right. Well, and I can't blame you. It's not an English word, or probably any other language that you have. But so the Arabs they're fascinating. Their love culture is fascinating, because there are 7 stages. Okay, there might be 9, but there's 7 or 9 stages of love that I studied when I was an undergrad for Arabic culture, and it starts with a glance, and there's desire, and then goes all the way. and there's love, which is the love that we talk about in English, and then beyond love there is this Gennoon. And in Arabic literature, the quintessential romantic hero is actually Persian, but it's really in Pakistan, Persia, India. You'll find this character. His name is Qais. Okay, which is a little tidbit for people who have read the book. This mad lover, he actually falls in love with Layla, who is a woman in his town, but for various reasons they can't get together. It's a star-crossed lover story, and so he goes mad with Gennoon, and he gets called Majnoon, becomes his name, which means he who has Gennoon, who's mad. But he is the quintessential romantic hero of the culture that I'm from, and he has a lot of really fascinating stories. His wisdom is considered to be a very high level. So the question is, who is mad? Is Majnun mad, or is the rest of society mad? And that's the question that his story asks. So, for example, very quickly, one of his stories is, when a Muslim is praying, you're not supposed to walk in front of them because they're bowing to the ground and they're bowing in front of God. So if you stand in front of them or walk in front of them, it's considered very, very rude because you're putting yourself in the place of God, essentially. And so Majnun is on one end of town, and he hears that Layla is at the other end of town. And there's a group of people praying right where he has to cross. So he runs in front of them because he wants to get a glimpse of his beloved as she's wandering by. And they catch up to him afterwards, and they start, asking him why he did that. Doesn't he know he's not supposed to do that? And Majnun says, what is strange is that in the love of a woman, I was so engrossed and consumed that I did not see the mosque and I did not see you praying. But you, who were consumed by the love of God, you were able to see me run by. So
I love that.
So Majnun is amazing. And so that's what the concept of Gennoon, to be so consumed with love that the rest of the world ceases to exist, and you seem a little mad to everyone else who's not consumed by that love. Mm-hmm. I would highly recommend the epic poem Layla and Majnun. I can send you a link. By Nizami, is the poet, Nizami, which is the last name of the protagonist in my next book. But anyway, as a little tribute. Yeah. So that is where the word June comes from. And then, by the way, just to put a cap on it for the paragraph that you read, the last stage of love, the final ultimate stage of love in the Arab sort of structure of it, is death. It is being so consumed by love that you die, which is what happens to Majnun, and that's what happens to that's what he's talking about. What he's talking about when he says to burn and burn and burn until there's nothing left of me, is to be completely consumed by it.
And so, just to dig down on this, because I find this concept so fascinating. So, this love madness that Gennoon is describing in this culture is actually a positive and spiritual thing, rather than say like a Romeo and Juliet kind of love, which is like ultimately like the madness leads to tragedy. It's this madness leads to some kind of like spiritual awakening or kind of like holy deliverance of oneself. Is that right?
Right. I mean, it's not necessarily always a positive thing. It's one of those things where, have you read, this is completely out of left field, I'm sorry, but that's not how my mind works. The best example I can find of this is the Conan books, the Conan the Barbarian.
Okay. I've seen the movie. I love the original Schwarzenegger movie.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the movie too. I'm not sure the movie has as much of this. In the books, there's always a question of everyone looks down on the barbarian because they're civilized and the barbarian is not. But the narrator and the author is always talking about, yeah, but who's really civilized? Isn't the barbarian more civilized than you are because he has these qualities that you have lost as a result of being civilized? And so there's that thread running through the Majnun story where, yeah, he's mad in love, but aren't you mad for the things that you do because you're not consumed by love? So there's that. Also in Muslim literature, especially classic Muslim literature and poetry, when you talk about Rumi, when you talk about Fez, when you talk about Hafiz, these guys, their writing is actually very spiritual, and it is the beloved, when they talk about the beloved, is in the place of God. Like there's a stand-in sort of thing happening. So it's not like Romeo and Juliet. I use that as an example because it's the easiest example to convey how well known the story is, and how, I mean, it gets mentioned like in everyday conversation, like, you
Wow.
know. So it's a permanent part of the culture.
Wow. That's great. See, folks, and this is what it's like reading Syed's book. It's like, it's just kind of like one story, one parable kind of piled upon the next. And it's just this wonderful experience, just like the conversation that we're having. So yeah, I want to use that to like pivot into some things about, Muslim literature and Muslim American literature. And, I love the classics, and I also love the religions of the world. And so, the poets you mentioned, Rumi and Hafiz, I love them both. Some of my favorite writers. And I will go further and say that the Quran is also a favorite of mine in a way. I mean, it's a book that I've read many times, and it's been many years since I've read it. But one of the things that was so wonderful about your book is that it reminded me how beautiful that book is. Obviously, needless to say, one of the great works of literature in the history of the world. And I just, to me, it's something that I've never really been able to talk to many people about, because I don't have many Muslim friends, and it's not a book that is widely read about among non-Muslims. But I was so refreshed and struck by the way that the characters in this book discuss the Quran. And it made me think, like, boy, I actually looked up the number. There's 3.5 million Muslim Americans. Why is the Quran not more of a mainstream, more discussed in the mainstream in the literary world? And your book is just one of the very few that I have read that discusses it in this way. So I guess just first, I just want to ask you just about that. Why is the Quran not more in the mainstream literary discussion, kind of in the waters that you and I swim in, which is the literary world?
Right. Before I answer the question really quickly, I will just say what's amazing about the Quran is it can be very beautiful in translation, but the actual genius of it is when you hear it in Arabic. Because yes, it has all these things, but they're all, I don't want to say it's verse, but it is in a way that it there's an, when you hear it spoken is what I'm saying. When you hear it recited, it's very different, and it's an experience. So anyway, that's an aside. Then reading the translation, I also rely on the translations because I don't have Arabic. I have the phonics of Arabic, but I don't have the words. Anyway, as far as why the Quran doesn't make it into more books, I think there are a couple of reasons, and I will say that I have a tremendous amount of respect for the Western literary canon and the way it's dealt with the Torah and the Bible, right? I mean, I was trained in this when I was an undergrad. I studied the Bible and Torah and literature, and their impact on it. And when I was writing it, I wanted to be able to reference the Quran in the same way, and so I just did it. And so, I think the reason other authors don't do it is, first of all, it's an accessibility issue, right? One of the things as a writer you always have to ask yourself is, how much work are you going to make your audience do, right? I mean, there's only so much of it that's fair, right? And so it comes down to minute choices like italicizing foreign words or not italicizing them, or what references to use and what references not to use. So I think there's part of that. The other part of it is when you're writing about the Quran or Islam, you're treading in some pretty dangerous waters, let's just say, right? I mean, you can stir up a lot of controversy, even if you're not looking for it, because one of the things that you learn as an author really quickly is once the book is off your computer now, I guess, off your desk. Once it's off your desk, it's not yours anymore. It belongs to the audience, and they're going to read it in whatever way they want. And so you may not have intended, to cause offense, but you may end up in causing serious offense. One of my favorite professors in undergrad, Professor Kortnar in the University of Toronto, he maintained that he's an expert in Salman Rushdie. That's his expertise. And his theory of Salman Rushdie is that Salman Rushdie didn't actually mean to offend as many people as he did. but that the act of writing is very solitary. And so you get caught up in your own head and you think about how you would receive this information.
Mm-hmm.
And so according to Professor Kortnar, and Professor, if you're listening, if I'm misspeaking on your behalf, I apologize. But he said the tragedy of Salman Rushdie might be that for him, the greatest thing anyone can do, the greatest miracle, is to be able to write something and then have other people believe it, right? I mean, that is a huge power for an author. That's heroic for an author, right? So he feels like Salman Rushdie got caught up in that and wanted to paint the Prophet as having done this amazing thing in Salman Rushdie's mind. The problem is the Quran is not for Muslims a created book. It is by man. Right. So by doing that, he got himself into trouble. But at least Professor Kortnar back in, 20 years ago, did not used to think that it was necessarily something that he appreciated the impact of when he was doing it. So my point is, it is dangerous to do. It is subject to a lot of interpretations, and it takes some courage. And I will say this very quickly. My wife was very nervous. I was very nervous, but I knew I was going to get a lot of pushback on my work, and I was very scared. I told my agent, you're gonna get hit, I hope you're okay with that. And then my wife was so worried when my first book, More Than Just a Pretty Face, came out, which I was not expecting to get hit on, but I did. In terms of what was in the book, and people didn't like certain things, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure. But when the first book came out, my wife went over to the mosque with a copy of the advanced reader copy before the book even came out, because she was convinced that my books are going to disgrace the family name and no one's going to want to marry our kids because of what I wrote, and we're going to be like outcasts in the community. And so she gave an arc to my imam to read so that the imam would be able to sort of tell her how bad it's going to be. And everyone reads it, and so there's a lot of stress and nervousness and fear that goes into writing about the Quran and Islam, especially if you're writing with a smile, the way I do it, so with some humor. So I think those are a couple of reasons. I'm sure there are more, but those are the ones I can think of.
Well, don't hide the punchline here. What did the imam say?
The imam he's actually fantastic. He actually thinks it's great. He thought, what he told my wife was, what your husband is doing is bringing this to the mainstream in a way that hasn't been done.
Yes.
And so he's like, this is actually excellent because it starts a conversation. And there was, when Pretty Face came out, I didn't know better than to stay away from reviews. People were tagging me in them, someone actually basically said I wasn't Muslim anymore because of the way I had written about Islam, right? And the funny thing is, you can't judge an author's spirituality or religion from the way his characters behave, right? But I texted my imam and I'm like, dude, they're killing me out here, I'm apparently not Muslim anymore. And he said, you always want to offend the right people. And so, so he's like, that's how you're doing something, but at least you're creating a conversation. So he's always been for it. And so I appreciate the support.
Man, I want to meet this imam. He sounds awesome.
he is awesome. He is awesome. He's in fact in the acknowledgments, I believe, for Bad Muslims. I'm pretty sure. In one of my books, I'm sort of getting to the point where the acknowledgments are like, I don't know what I put in which one anymore, but I do thank him in one of my books because it's been really important. At least, yes, it's been very important to have someone who I respect, who does understand the project that I'm on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hey, I'm just one voter, but I think it's a wonderful project. And as I said, for all the reasons I said earlier, I'm so grateful that you've done it, and particularly in how well executed it is. But, so we were talking ahead of time in the green room about the kind of broader reaction of the Muslim American community. And you said that you don't go on Goodreads, and I think that's probably wise. But there is I mentioned to Syed earlier, there is a very engaging and lengthy thread of comments in Goodreads. I mean, it's a real fat thread where there's like a lot of spirited debate about the representation of Muslims in this book. And I guess just Syed, I get the question is just, what has you've already mentioned some of the response, but what has the response been like?
Well, I think once you block off Goodreads, you're sort of self-selecting, aren't you? So but here's the thing. I think debate is good. I think it's excellent. I haven't read that thread or any other reviews, but from what I've been told from people, because people talk to you about it.
Yeah.
My mom of Goodreads was the project, but anyway, I have made no claims to represent Muslims, right? I mean, I can't. You try to capture a broad range of opinions when you're writing, and from what I understand, one of the things was, oh, there are no good Muslim characters who are worthy of admiration. I completely disagree. I think the landlord is a great Muslim and very worthy of the admiration of the reader. That being said, I will say that representation is a tricky issue for a couple of reasons. One is, you can't expect one person to write on behalf of billions of people. It is impossible. Right. The Muslim experience is as diverse and varied as other experiences. But the other reason that representation is tricky is books and stories are written about extraordinary circumstances and extraordinary events and extraordinary lives, right? So I would hope, yes, people say this has never happened to me. Well, I hope it never happens to you. It's never happened to me. I mean, it's fiction, right? And so what is representation in fiction? It's not going to capture the everyday experience of people, because these are people who have lived and suffered through things other people don't. That's the reason why their stories are engaging, right? I mean, I heard about this play. I have never actually seen it. So so this is hearsay, probably twice removed. But someone told me about a play, and it was called The Life of a Terrorist. And all it was a guy getting up in the morning, brushing his teeth, having breakfast, doing his groceries, going to work, hanging out his job, and then he goes to sleep and the play is over. Nothing happens in the play, because the everyday experience is. So when you tell that story, yes, that person is trying to make a point. The playwright is trying to make a point there. But going off of that, what I'm trying to say is, you can't write a novel about that, right? I mean, you could, I suppose, but I can't write a novel about that. You write about the extraordinary event that happened. And so, yes, is the book a perfect representation of Muslims? No, but it never claims to be. And I don't think any fiction is a perfect encapsulation of what people are like. That would be like saying, oh, I watch the Avengers, so I know what America's like. No, it's entertainment, and it's not meant to necessarily represent people. You mentioned Joyce earlier. I mean, I wonder how. It's a question that was never asked before. Right. I don't know if there was a question of, is this good representation in James Joyce? Is William Shakespeare good representation? And so it's a burden that's placed, I think, on certain authors. Because that's the other thing too, right? I mean, no one reads Stephen King and asks, hey, is this good representation? I mean, the fact, and quite frankly, I think it is, but no one asks that question. It's a question that's asked of certain types of authors, and it's a question that's sometimes motivated by modeling for the external gaze, right? We want people to look at Muslims in certain ways, and so we should tell certain stories about them. Because one of the things that came out when Pretty Face was published, and like I said, I didn't know back then that you shouldn't read reviews. One of the things someone said, and actually they may have tagged me on this, is they said, what will people think of Muslims if this is what they think Muslims are? I'm like, well, that's not the purpose of fiction, right? I mean, it was Ursula Le Guin who said, I'm not a preacher, I'm a fiction writer, and I think it's something that everyone deals with to a degree, but it's become difficult, and it's become a serious issue in the time of representation now, which I think has positives and negatives.
And just one more question. We have a bunch of audience questions that I want to ask, but last question from me before we get to the audience questions is, for Americans outside of the Muslim American community, someone like me who is, has a Christian background, what, but not just me, any other non-Muslim American, what is it that you hope that are you hoping to reach that group as well? And is there something that like you would hope that that non-Muslim reader would take from this?
Sure. Yeah, I think as far as non-Muslim readers, I would say first of all, the criticism of the book from people is because, just to be clear, my understanding is that there are defenders of the representation in the book as well as people who are unhappy with it, right? So that's what's going on. That's excellent, right? And what I would say is read more Muslim American books, read more Muslim books, and you will see a broader range of representation by more exposure. And this problem will solve itself when there are more voices, right? And so read broadly. The other thing is I think I did a pretty good job of showing very normal people who are Muslim. It's like parts of the book, especially dealing with Anwar's family, you know, it's like a little sitcom going on with Anwar's family. And it is just an opportunity for non-Muslims to see the everyday lives of Muslims. Someone said to me, you know, it gave me access to places that I don't get access to. There's scenes set in a mosque, so you get to see what goes on in a mosque a little bit. You know, you get to be in the homes of Muslims in a way. I once had someone, I forget, it was actually like some kind of radio show host or something, and he was going on about how he's never been inside a Muslim household. Well, now you have, you know, at least, you know, in a literary way. So I think it gives you an opportunity to see that they're just like everyone else. It's just that they happen to believe things that, as far as their spirituality is concerned, are different than you. But that's true for all religions, and it's true for a bunch of denominations inside religions too. So I think one of the main themes in the book is the common thread of humanity that runs through us all.
Yep, absolutely. All right, we have a few questions that are popping. We're going to get popped up on the screen here. Is it placed? Is it placed on certain authors, or do writers place that weight upon their own shoulders? Hold on, I don't know what the beginning of that question is. Hold on. My producer might just put up the rest of that question, but let's see. Oh, so another question while my producer is putting that one up, the other question I had was, how did you find audio actors for the audiobook?
Okay, so the way this works, just peel back a curtain a little bit, is they'll send you, the publisher will send you samples. Depending on who the publisher is, the number of samples will vary, but these are people that they've selected to play the parts. And as far as Anwar's voice was concerned, I had gotten a sample of Pej's narration for my YA book, More Than Just a Pretty Face. But Pej has a very deep voice, and it's a grown man's voice, you know. And I was kind of like, he just sounds older. And so we didn't go with Pej for Pretty Face, but I was really impressed with the narration. And so when the time for Bad Muslim came around and they sent me samples, I was like, yeah, these are great, but there's this other guy that I heard in you know, when he was doing Pretty Face. Let's see if he can bring him in to do it. And that's how he came on board, and I'm very grateful that he did. And then Miss Ayub, I believe, who's the narrator for Safwa and Aza, she was part of the sample that they sent me, and she's excellent as well. So that's always the fun part, right? That's when the job is done, the book is in, it's been accepted. You have nothing to do as an author except just provide input, which is fun to do. So
yeah, absolutely. All right, here's another question. Did you have a plot, like a story that you wanted to tell that needed characters, or did you have characters that were in search of a story?
Oh, I always have characters that are in search of a story. I mean, you know, I don't plot, which is failing. I will admit freely, but plot, I always feel like it's for other people. You know, it's not really for me. And so I'm more concerned about the characters. I always am. I write off a blank page. Just again, peeling back the curtain a little bit. My next book, which is Sway With Me, which is a young adult book.
Beautiful.
They did a great job on the cover. I've been very fortunate with covers, but anyway, you know, this was the first time when I was writing under contract, and so there was someone there for the journey with me.
Yeah,
and I think it's interesting because now I get to see my own journey from outside perspectives, right? And so it's very haphazard. I wouldn't recommend it for anyone, but basically, I think of characters and I think of a scenario, and then I sort of start writing around it, and I hope a plot will emerge. And then when it does, in my second draft and revision, then I strengthen the plot and sort of put the story together, but I'm always more interested in what the characters are and what they're going to do than what they're going to do or what they're going to go through.
And by the way, that made me think of a different question that I hadn't asked you that I wanted to, or sort of running short on time here, but maybe quickly. I know the journey to getting Bad Muslim Discount published was an unusual one. Can you just summarize it for us?
Yeah, very quickly. I wrote it as a personal reaction to the election cycle. Not this one, but the last one, obviously.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of emotions, a lot of feelings going through, because it was like being American, but being told you're not. The book is actually very much about belonging, right? I mean, what does it mean to be American when people tell you you're not? What does it mean to belong to a family that doesn't want you? What does it mean to belong to a religion where people tell you you're not good at it? You know, and so the book has a lot of belonging themes in it, and that's one of the reasons why. So it was very close to me emotionally, closer than any other work has been, which is a bad place to be as an author, because when you go through submissions and you get rejections and all this, it's really difficult. And so I wrote Pretty Face to try and cleanse my palate and sort of restore my sanity. So Pretty Face was the second book that I wrote, but it got picked up first. And so it got published first. And then we waited on Bad Muslim a few months after Bad Muslim came out. Bad Muslim got picked up. And so it was just a longer wait for Bad Muslim to get picked up. And there was a lot of emotion involved with just getting through the submission process.
And just briefly, I mean, did you get a lot of, was there a lot of rejections? Did it take a long time to sell the book? Did you have to make any adjustments to the book after getting feedback or anything?
Yeah. So, yes, there were, but the thing is, I always feel strange about saying a lot, right? I mean, what's a lot? For some people, 5 is a lot. For other people, 20 is a lot. Right. So it felt like a lot. I can tell you that much. It felt like a lot. I don't remember how many there were, but there were quite a few rejections. And some of them were, this is never going to sell, was basically what it was.
Why? Why is it never going to sell?
I did not ask. So I got to the point in the book where what I realized was getting rejected is very, very bad for your mental health. And getting rejected repeatedly, especially with something that's sort of you made and you produced, is really difficult. So what I told my agent was, I don't want to know about rejections anymore. Yeah. I don't want to hear it. You do you. I'm just going to work on my next book, because that's the only thing you can control is the next book, right? And so I don't know what the philosophy was, but I do know there was some concern about whether or not it'll sell. And then there was some concern about it's too realistic. There was all kinds of stuff, that I actually disengaged myself from and I wasn't really involved in. So when she called me, I knew it was going to be good news eventually. Right? Yeah. So yeah, that's there were over, I would say there were at least over 20 rejections, but I don't know exactly how many there were because I bowed out of that particular arena.
Well, now you're getting reviewed in the New Yorker, and I think you've come through pretty well and you've proven them all wrong. All right, last question from me before we wrap here. This is a question that I ask all the authors that come on the show, and that is this. Just imagine, if you will, the ideal reader for this book. Imagine that you have a reader who is kind of understanding everything that you're up to, getting all your references. This is just a direct hit for this reader. And that ideal reader closes the book after reading the last page. Describe for me in a phrase or even a word, what is the feeling that this reader has?
So you're talking about my wife then, is what you're saying. No, because it's actually, Stephen King talks about this in On Writing. Yeah. He writes for his spouse as his ideal reader, and my spouse is my ideal reader. I get a lot of feedback from her, and so when she finished it, she was in absolute love with it. She said she always knew. So just I know we're not short on time, but very quickly, we had an arranged marriage, so our courtship was entirely through emails, and so we have like these massively long emails we wrote to each other for months before we got married, and she was the one who was pushing me to write, because she's like, I know you can do this. I know you're good because I've seen writing samples. And so she said, not to share too much personal stuff, but she says, it makes me fall in love with you over again, is what she said. So that was her phrase. And that's what I'll leave it at.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Oh, all right. Well, folks, the book is called The Bad Muslim Discount for so many reasons. I hope that this interview just kind of gave you a sort of taste. I think there's what's great about this interview, Syed, if I may, is that I think this conversation reflects the content and tone of your work, maybe more than other conversations that I've had, which is not to make a value judgment on other books, but it's just there is this kind of warm-hearted, open conversational style to your writing, which is reflected in kind of the way you're interacting with me. And I think the voice is just sort of irresistible. So folks, I hope that you've enjoyed this conversation. And Syed, could you just hold up that book one more time, just so people can see?
Yes.
And folks, we have there it is, beautiful cover. We have the links in the chat. Go ahead and buy a few. Don't even hesitate. Syed, congratulations on the book. It's wonderful, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I had a great time. Thank you.
Great. All right, folks. We'll be back. Next week is off, but then back with Carolyn Kepnes and then George Saunders after that. So we'll see you then.